You wake up spiritually, and then what? The illusions fall. The drive to chase what once felt urgent, status, validation, achievement, evaporates. You're left with this vast inner space. It's not depression. It's not burnout. It's the death of the old game. But no one tells you what comes after. No one tells you that after awakening, life doesn't just go back to normal, it demands to become symbolic. In the last video, we explored why motivation vanishes after awakening, why your ego crumbles, how trauma and projection distort your path, and what it really means to move from fear to authenticity. But that's only the death part. Today, we begin the rebirth. Not into another identity, not into another illusion, but into what Jung called a symbolic life. This video is for those who've crossed the threshold and now ask, how do I live now? Not theoretically, practically. How do I build a life that isn't just a performance of spiritual ideas, but a real embodiment of inner truth? We'll break this down into clear steps. You'll learn how to decode your daily experience as if it were a dream, how to see the myth you're living, how to recognize when you've swapped ego for a spiritual persona, and how to come back to the ordinary world, not as a failure, but as someone carrying fire. Let's start with a truth Jung said plainly, but most people skip. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But after awakening, avoidance is no longer an option. You see, you know, and the only way forward is through. So here's the map. 1. What is symbolic life, and why Jung called it the only real solution after awakening. 2. How to tell the difference between real inner guidance and spiritual bypass. 3. The myth of being done, why awakening is the beginning of conscious suffering, not the end. And finally, how to transform routine life into ritual, presence, and meaning, not as a trick, but as a way of being. Let's go deeper. You didn't wake up just to feel empty, but here you are, fully aware, deeply conscious, and still wondering why life feels flat, quiet, or meaningless. Let me be brutally clear. Awakening doesn't end your suffering. It ends your illusions. And once they're gone, you have 2 choices. Either rebuild another illusion to stay busy, or start living symbolically. That's the map Jung offered. He called it the symbolic life. And he believed most neuroses, addictions, and existential dread come not from pain, but from the absence of symbolic meaning, from being trapped in a literal life. So if you've lost motivation, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because your old game died. And now your soul is asking for a new operating system. Let's reframe this with a hook. Why do I feel more numb after becoming more conscious? Because your psyche was never meant to run on ego goals. It was designed to live mythically. Here's a real story. A client of mine, former startup founder, had a full spiritual breakdown after his 3rd exit. He started meditating, reading Jung, practicing shadow work. At first, it was liberation. No more chasing, no more fear. But a few months in, he called me and said, I feel like I've unplugged from the matrix, and now I'm standing in a desert. He wasn't lost. He was in the symbolic gap. Let me break down what that means. The gap after awakening. After ego death, there is always a phase Jung described as enantiodromia, the swinging of the psyche into its opposite. You go from hyper-purposeful to apathetic, from achieving to drifting, from clarity to fog. This is not a failure, it's a transition. But if you don't have a map for this phase, you'll either 1. Rebuild a new spiritual ego to feel productive again. 2. Fall into depression, thinking something went wrong. 3. Numb out through distractions and call it non-attachment. None of these are symbolic life, they're bypasses. The solution: symbolic life. Here's how Jung defines symbolic life. A life in which every day has meaning through connection to the unconscious, to myth, and to the inner world. This isn't about becoming a monk or moving to the mountains. It's about living your ordinary life as if it were a sacred ritual, making your inner world visible in your outer actions. Let's make this ultra-practical. Framework: building a symbolic life. 1. Decode your myth. You're already living a myth. The question is, do you know which one? Ask yourself, what archetypes dominate my psyche right now? Hero, orphan, sage, trickster? What inner story am I unconsciously enacting? Redemption, revenge, escape? What images, symbols, or dreams keep repeating in my life? Symbolic rule: your repeated patterns are mythic signatures. They aren't mistakes, they're messages. Exercise. Track your last 10 vivid dreams and key life moments. Find common themes, symbols, or feelings. You'll start to notice a narrative structure emerging. This is your living myth. 2. Ritualize the ordinary. Turn routine into ritual, not for show but for depth. Eat like it's communion. Walk like you're entering sacred space. Speak as if your words sculpt reality, because they do. 3-layer ritual model. Outer action. Drinking tea, walking, cooking. Inner meaning, the intention behind it, gratitude, purification, offering. Mythic frame, the story it connects to, healer archetype, seeker's journey, transformation. Example, instead of just exercising, move as if you're embodying the warrior, not to get abs, but to transmute stagnation. It's not role play, it's presence through archetype. 3. Obey the symbolic clues. Life starts giving you symbols, not commands. You won't get clear shoulds anymore. You'll get dreams, synchronicities, gut pulls. This is where most people get lost. They wait for certainty. But the symbolic path runs on pattern recognition. Checklist, symbolic signals versus ego desires. Signal, symbolic path, ego path. Feels strange but resonant, yes, no. Requires inner stretch, yes, no. Flatters identity, no. Demands patience, yes, no. When in doubt, choose what feels meaningfully uncomfortable, not what feels emotionally convenient. The deep shift, from goals to resonance. Once you've stepped into symbolic life, motivation transforms. Old way, I must do this to become someone. Symbolic way, this is what's being lived through me now. You stop pushing, you start listening. Not passively, but as an active participant in the unfolding myth. That's not laziness, it's alignment. Rule of reverse motivation. If your drive comes from lack, trauma, or comparison, it's ego. If it comes from symbolic clarity, it will feel quieter but more magnetic. Conclusion and call to action. You didn't lose motivation. You lost the illusion that external results would ever be enough. What you need now is not more discipline, but a deeper orientation. One that lets you live not toward some perfect future, but from an integrated now. In the next video, we'll go further. How to spot false awakenings and the trap of the spiritual persona, the hidden narcissism in high consciousness identities, and how to ground truth without abandoning depth. But for now, start small. Pick one daily habit and make it symbolic. Journal like a scribe of your own myth. Walk like a pilgrim through your own city. Trust the weird dreams. They're not random. They're you, trying to speak to you. And if this spoke to your inner world, subscribe, because what's coming next might just name the thing you couldn't explain for years. You awakened, you saw through the illusion, you dropped the chase, but somehow you're still suffering, still judging, still subtly performing. Why? Because the ego has one last move. It puts on a spiritual mask and calls itself the self. This is the most dangerous illusion after awakening, not the fear of going back to sleep, but the belief that you're already fully awake. Let me hit you with the hook. What if your new identity as a conscious person is the very thing blocking your next transformation? This happens more than you think. In fact, it's expected. Jung warned that after an initial confrontation with the unconscious, the ego tries to reorganize itself around the image of enlightenment. Not the experience, the image. Here's the story. A woman I worked with spent years healing from trauma. Plant medicine, yoga, shadow work, integration, you name it. Her inner child work was deep, her mind was sharp. But she kept saying, I feel disconnected from my body, but I don't know why. When we really slowed down, it became clear she had replaced her old perfectionism with spiritual purity. She had created a persona of healedness, but her real feelings had no room anymore. Her shadow? Now dressed in white robes, preaching detachment. Let's break this trap down. The spiritual vitrine. This is the phase where you unconsciously turn your awakening into a performance. It often sounds like, I don't react anymore, I'm just observing. I don't need relationships, I'm whole on my own. I don't judge anyone, but they're clearly not evolved. This isn't integration, it's suppression, rebranded. Why is it so seductive? Because the ego would rather die pretending it's healed than live as something it can't control. And spiritual language gives it camouflage. You can't criticize someone who's just witnessing, right? But here's the psychological cost. Emotional disconnection, especially from anger, grief, jealousy. Loss of spontaneity. Inner hierarchy, judging parts of self as less conscious. Subtle superiority complex. Let's reframe it as a pattern. Diagnostic. Signs you're trapped in the false self. Use this checklist honestly, not to shame yourself, but to expose the pattern. Question, red flag, do I feel pressure to appear unbothered or healed? Yes. Do I subtly avoid intense emotions by calling it detachment? Yes. Do I feel ashamed when I experience old wounds reactivated? Yes. Do I secretly compare my level of consciousness to others? Yes. Do I have fewer deep relationships since becoming awakened? Yes. If you checked 3 or more, you're likely operating from a spiritual persona, not true self. Let's go deeper. False self vs true self. Aspect. False self, spiritual vitrin. True self, integrated individuation. You're likely operating. Origin, ego reacting to awakening. Self arising through surrender. Emotion, repressed or rationalized. Felt, owned, integrated. Identity, static, image-based, evolving, layered. Relationships, distanced, hierarchical, intimate, equal. Growth, perfectionism hidden as process. Surrender to ongoing alchemy. This is why Jung insisted, individuation is not about becoming a perfect person, it's about becoming a whole person, and wholeness includes darkness. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Jung. Tool, shadow reclamation ritual. Here's a practical exercise to start dismantling the false self. 1. Identify a reaction you usually suppress, e.g. jealousy, anger, judgment. 2. Write down the story your spiritual mind tells about it, e.g. this isn't me anymore. 3. Ask, what would this part say if I gave it a voice? 4. Speak it out loud or write it uncensored. 5. Feel it fully without moralizing. Don't fix, just listen. Symbolic reframe. That shadow isn't regression, it's integration in progress. Let it speak, let it rage, let it mourn. You don't regress when you feel, you regress when you fake peace. The danger of peaking early. Many seekers burn out here. They have one breakthrough, one dark night, one massive ego death, and then build a temple around it. They stop exploring, they settle into comfort. But self doesn't work like that. It's not an event, it's a process. If you're not regularly being humbled, challenged, unraveled, you're probably stuck in the false self. Here's how you stay dynamic. Practice cyclical self-renewal. Instead of trying to stay aligned 100% of the time, adopt a seasonal model of inner growth. Inner spring, curiosity, new practices, exploring unknown aspects. Inner summer, confidence, expression, building structures. Inner autumn, letting go of roles, shedding masks. Inner winter, silence, confusion, surrender, waiting. Ask yourself, what season am I in right now? Reminder, every symbolic cycle includes ego death. Again and again, you don't graduate, you spiral upward. Conclusion and invitation. Let me say it clearly, your ego will use anything to stay in control, even enlightenment. Don't let it. Don't worship the mask of transformation. Keep walking, keep feeling, keep cracking open. Next, we'll enter the emotional battlefield of relationships after awakening. Why your old bonds may dissolve. How projection becomes more intense. And how to love without losing yourself. If that's where your edge is, subscribe, come back and bring your whole self. No mask, no performance, just the truth you're ready to feel. You thought relationships would get easier after awakening, but they didn't. They got more intense, more mysterious, more dangerous. Why? Because awakening dissolves your defense mechanisms. And now, every person you get close to touches your deepest structures, your hidden needs, your unhealed patterns, your projections. So here's the hook. The more awake you are, the more potent your relationships become, because now they activate not your ego, but your unconscious. Let's go to the story. A man I worked with went through a profound spiritual shift after his divorce. He stopped chasing, slowed down, and started to feel himself for the first time. Then he met someone. He said, "It's different this time. We're both conscious." But within a few months, he was triggered more than ever. Claustrophobia, fear of engulfment, idealization, rage. Not because the relationship was toxic, but because it was real. No roles, no rescuing, no mask, just two nervous systems facing the raw unknown. He hadn't regressed, he had arrived at the edge of real intimacy. Why relationships after awakening feel harder? Let's name the paradox. The more conscious you become, the harder it gets to unconsciously merge or avoid. That means you can't pretend to be fine when you're not. You see through your projections and still feel them. You no longer crave rescue, but still crave connection. Here's why this happens. Function: before awakening, after awakening. Attachment: driven by fear, lack, surfaces unmet needs clearly. Projection: mostly unconscious. Conscious but emotionally charged. Merging creates illusion of safety, becomes suffocating. Distance feels like freedom, can trigger abandonment wounds. You're no longer buffered by illusions, so everything feels more real and more volatile. The projection intimacy framework. Let's dissect this with a framework I call PIA: projection, integration, autonomy. 1. Projection. You unconsciously assign traits from your inner world onto the other. E.g., she's always judging me, equals your inner critic. But 2. Integration. You recognize the projection and start to feel what it represents in you. 3. Autonomy. You relate from self, owning your feelings while seeing the other as separate. Most relationships break in step 2 because it's uncomfortable. You realize it's not just them, it's me, my unmet grief, my old attachment wound, my shadow. Example: if you keep feeling your partner pulling away, ask, what emotion does that trigger in me? Where have I felt this before, outside of this relationship? What need am I outsourcing? That's the work. You stop blaming, you start integrating. Polarity is not a game. There's a trend in spiritual circles around masculine-feminine polarity. Some of it is useful, most of it is performative. Here's the truth. Real polarity isn't about roles. It's about presence versus vulnerability, stability versus chaos, will versus surrender, and these shift moment by moment. Framework: relational polarity map, axis, masculine not gender, feminine. Presence: grounded, still, flowing, expressive. Response: container, eruption. Wound: pressure to hold all, fear of being too much. Gift: clarity, aliveness. In awakened relationship, you both carry both. You alternate, you meet where needed. Key rule: don't play polarity, live polarity. You don't lead to prove anything. You lead because it's true in that moment, or you soften because that's what restores wholeness. Boundaries: walls. After awakening, many retreat into solitude. They say, I can't handle people's energy. Fair. But here's the trap. Isolation is not purity. You're meant to test your boundaries in relationship, not escape relationship to feel clear. Try this relational boundaries drill. 1. Feel the discomfort. 2. Locate the sensation in your body. 3. Name the fear. I'll be judged, used, rejected. 4. Speak from self, not defense. Instead of, you're overwhelming me. Try, I'm noticing my system contracting and I want to stay connected while staying grounded. Boundaries are not a rejection, they're an invitation to real intimacy, the cycle of conscious relationship. Here's the sequence most people resist. 1. Magnetism. Something deeper recognizes itself in the other. 2. Merging. The illusion of oneness, safety, romance. 3. Triggering. Old wounds surface, ego death begins. 4. Withdrawal. Defense mechanisms flare, distance or control. 5. Choice. Leave, numb, or relate from self. 6. Repair. New language, mutual holding, deeper union. You repeat this over and over. But with time, step 3 doesn't scare you. Step 4 becomes shorter. Step 5 becomes more conscious. Step 6 becomes sacred. This is what conscious love looks like. Not ease, but co-evolution. Daily practice for relational integration. Here's a micro practice I give to clients. Before reacting, feel what age you are. Example: you feel abandoned. Pause. I feel like I'm 7. Speak from that. There's a young part in me that feels scared right now. This disarms shame, invites empathy, disrupts cycles of blame. And the other person, if they're conscious, they'll meet you there. If they're not, you'll know. Conclusion and next edge. Here's the final truth. You don't need a partner who completes you. You need one who activates you and stays. But even if they don't stay, you stay with yourself. That's the gift of post-awakening relationship. You don't lose yourself in love. You find yourself in what love reveals. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into how to live a symbolic life, how to turn everyday moments into initiations, how to alchemize the ordinary into the sacred. This is where the true mystery begins, not in the peak, but in the kitchen, the silence, the solitude. So subscribe, reflect, let your past love stories teach you, and meet me in the next cycle. Только суть. You don't need to move to a monastery. You don't need ayahuasca in the jungle. You don't need to burn your past life to begin a sacred one. You need symbolic perception. The ability to live ordinary life as a profound ritual. That's what Jung meant by symbolic life, not superstition, but living with meaning, depth, and alignment between the inner and the outer. Here's the hook. The modern person is starving, not for food, but for symbolic meaning, and without it, even luxury becomes empty. Let's drop into the story. A woman I worked with had everything figured out. Spiritual practice, financial stability, good therapist. But she said, I feel numb, like I'm observing my life but not in it. I asked, where's your ritual? She paused. You mean like yoga? I said, no. Where's the act that connects your pain to a myth? Where's the fire that turns your longing into something holy? That's the moment she broke. She realized she was functioning, but not initiated. No bridge between her suffering and the soul. We began rebuilding it. What is symbolic life? Jung said, the lack of symbolic life is what makes people neurotic. Symbolic life is not magic or mysticism. It's a mode of perception. You no longer see your problems as random or cruel, but as meaningful signals from the unconscious. Example, ordinary mind. Why do I keep sabotaging relationships? Symbolic mind. This is the part of me longing for reintegration. What archetype am I in? What inner God am I ignoring? Framework. 3 layers of living. Mode, description, experience. Mechanical, reacting from habit, ego, role, numb, efficient, safe, therapeutic, healing wounds, finding balance, aware, clearer, stable, symbolically, mythically, aligning inner, outer, alive, deep, purposeful. Most people stop at therapeutic, but the soul, it waits in the symbolic. How to shift into symbolic mode. This is not abstract. You can train your system to perceive symbolically. Framework, RAAON, ritual, archetype, image, narrative. 1 ritual, embed meaning into simple acts, e.g. lighting a candle when ending a relationship, releasing the past through flame. 2, archetype, ask, what archetype is active in me now? Warrior, orphan, hermit, lover. 3, image, use dreams, visions, or metaphors as messages. Jung, the psyche speaks in images. 4, narrative, place your current challenge inside a larger mythic frame. E.g., this isn't failure, it's my descent into the underworld. Result, you stop asking why me and start asking what is this initiation calling me into, the power of micro-ritual. You don't need incense or chants, you need intention. Try this, the symbolic morning frame. 1, wake up, pause, ask, what energy is needed from me today? 2, place hands on heart or earth, speak a single word, clarity, courage, patience. 3, as you brush your teeth, imagine you're clearing psychic residue from the night. 4, as you drink water, imagine you're anointing the body temple for its mission. This sounds small, but it reprograms perception. Ordinary acts become sacred. You stop sleepwalking. The 4 mythic stages of life transformation. Let's root this deeper with a map. Every major internal shift passes through 4 symbolic stages. Framework, the mythic cycle. 1, departure, the call to leave the known, often triggered by crisis or longing. Symbol, the threshold. 2, descent, the confrontation with shadow, loss, grief, confusion. Symbol, the cave, underworld. 3, initiation, the death and rebirth of identity. Ego collapses, self emerges. Symbol, fire, blood, silence. 4, return, integration of new awareness into daily life. You share your gift with others. Symbol, the path home, the circle. Ask yourself, where am I in this cycle? What lesson is this phase demanding? What symbol represents where I stand now? If you can name your mythic place, you regain orientation, even in pain. Symbolic practice for integration. Here's a 5-minute daily ritual for symbolic integration. The mirror dialogue. 1, look into your eyes in the mirror. No distractions. 2, ask, who am I today? 3, let an image or feeling arise. Don't analyze, feel. 4, speak a message from that part of you. Example, I am the one who holds the line. I am the fire that doesn't burn out. 5, bow to yourself. Not out of ego, out of devotion. Do this for 7 days. Track the shifts in your energy. You'll begin to feel like you're inhabiting your life, not just enduring it. Dangers of symbolic bypass. Caution, symbolic life is not an excuse to escape the concrete. Examples of bypass: saying it's just karma instead of setting a boundary. Interpreting trauma symbolically without healing it somatically, using myths to avoid responsibility. Rule: symbolism without embodiment is fantasy. Always root meaning in behavior. Final note, from story to sacrament. When you live symbolically, every moment carries weight. A breakup becomes a burial, a job change becomes a rite of passage, a silent walk becomes communion, and slowly you realize you're not just healing, you're becoming a vessel. Not to perform, not to impress, but to remember what it means to be alive in the deepest way possible. That's the symbolic life. The outer world becomes a mirror, the inner world becomes a compass, and your ordinary days become sacred texts if you're willing to read them. You thought you awakened, you felt light, clarity, release, but soon the anxiety returns, the pressure to stay high vibe, the fear of regressing, and a subtle performance begins. You're no longer trying to be successful. Now you're trying to be spiritual, same prison, different costume. This is the trap of the false self, a persona built not on status or money, but on enlightenment itself. It feels sacred, it feels real, but it's a mask. And if you don't expose it, it becomes a silent tyrant, demanding purity, suppressing emotion, rejecting all that makes you human. Let's dig in. A man I mentored spent years healing his childhood trauma. He had clarity, compassion, peace. But when I asked, "What are you avoiding now?" he froze. "I'm afraid to get angry. It doesn't feel conscious." He hadn't healed anger, he just demonized it under a spiritual label. He wasn't free. He was trapped in his upgraded persona, the enlightened self. That's not freedom. That's repression in robes. What is the false self in spirituality? Jung said, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." In early life, the false self is built to be accepted, be the good child, the achiever, the pleaser. But after awakening, a new version forms, more subtle, more dangerous. Framework: 3 masks of the enlightened ego. 1. The light bearer. I must stay positive. Darkness is regression. Trap: suppressing shadow and pain to appear evolved. 2. The teacher. I know the truth. Others are asleep. Trap: superiority disguised as insight. 3. The ascetic. I don't need anything. I'm beyond attachment. Trap: dissociation masked as detachment. These masks feel empowering, but they are driven by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of falling, fear of being human. Signs you're trapped in a spiritual mask. You don't realize it immediately, but here are the clues. 1. You feel pressure to always hold space, even when you're exhausted. 2. You judge your emotions as low vibration instead of listening to them. 3. You overuse terms like alignment or karma to avoid confrontation. 4. You feel guilt when you act non-spiritual, swearing, grieving, doubting. 5. You present curated versions of your healing, never the chaos. Litmus test. Ask yourself, would I still be okay if others saw my shadow? If the answer is no, you're likely performing. How to break free from the false self. Freedom isn't about discarding your growth. It's about becoming whole. That means integrating what the spiritual mask rejected. Framework: RL. Recognize, expose, accept, live. 1. Recognize. Name the persona you've created, e.g. I'm playing the role of the peaceful one, but inside I'm furious. 2. Expose. Share it with someone who can hold it. Say, I've been pretending, here's what's really going on. 3. Accept. Let your shadow have a seat at the table. Your rage, lust, grief, they're not regressions. They're fragments seeking wholeness. 4. Live. Act from the self, not the mask. Do what's true, even if it's messy, loud, imperfect. You don't need to be pure. You need to be real. Inner conflict, self as a spiritual image. Let's map the battlefield. The internal war is between 2 forces. The self, the image. Grounded, elevated, messy, curated, embodied, idealized, human, sacred. The self says, let's cry today. The image says, you've transcended that. The self says, I'm confused. The image says, you're the guide. Act like it. Rule: if your spirituality doesn't make space for your entire humanity, it's ego in disguise. Allow your darkness to stay. Here's a practice for reclaiming your shadow from the false self. Shadow mirror ritual 5 min. 1. Stand in front of a mirror. No mask. No prep. 2. Whisper 3 feelings you're ashamed of. I'm jealous. I hate how small I feel. I want to be seen, even if it's for the wrong reason. 3. Breathe. Let them land. 4. Say, I allow you. I integrate you. I don't need to be pure. I need to be whole. Do this daily, not as punishment, as reconnection. The myth of being finished. There is no final form, no full clearance, no graduation from humanity. Jung wrote, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Your chaos is not your flaw, it's your material. Your contradictions are not shameful, they are alchemical. Avoid this trap. I should be beyond this by now. No, if you were done, you wouldn't be alive. You're still here because your soul is still sculpting. What to do next? 1. Reflect. Which spiritual mask do you tend to wear? 2. Track. When do you feel the urge to perform enlightenment? 3. Practice. Share your raw truth with someone you trust this week. 4. Integrate. Make space for one ugly emotion and love it like a child. And remember, you're not here to become light. You're here to become whole. Let them see your shadows. That's where your real power lives. You got it. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already shifted. Maybe you felt it. This isn't just information. This is what I've known deep down but couldn't put into words. Because we didn't just talk about motivation. We peeled back the layers to the core. Why after awakening, old goals lose their flavor. Why the ego, even disguised as spirituality, can take control again. Why true freedom isn't about understanding everything. It's about being authentic. We navigated through the collapse of false motivation, the transformation of the shadow, and how a new, genuine life emerges from the self, not from fear. But this is just the beginning. In the next video, we'll go even deeper. We'll explore how relationships, projections, and attraction radically change after awakening. Why people leave. Why you start being drawn not to those who are comfortable, but to those who challenge your growth. And how to build connections where playing a role isn't necessary. If you want to keep moving forward, to feel this deeply, think this clearly, and piece yourself together, hit subscribe. This isn't just content, it's a process, and you're part of it. See you in the next video.